Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. Good morning. This morning I wanted to talk about what's called traditionally the two truths. And I've seen a lot of conflict, I would say lately, but it seems like it's not lately. A lot of conflict arises in communities, and in particular, it seems, in Buddhist communities, when there's a misunderstanding of this fundamental Dharma teaching. When I might argue this fundamental truth. So, and the conflict that I've seen doesn't stem just in recent days or modern history. This is a conflict that's clearly been going on since the beginning of Dharma practice. One of our ancestors in the lineage, his name is Nagarjuna, and he composed a text called the Discourses on the Middle Way. It's Mula Madhyamika Karika in Sanskrit. And this is the first place that I've seen that really clearly sets out what he calls the two truths, which are, as he terms them, the absolute truth and the relative truth. And as human beings, it's our tendency to want a truth that is singular, a singular truth that binds everything. And our desire for this leads us to jump on first one way and then the other way. We view this world in a really sort of divided, chopped up way, inside and outside, me and everybody else. And although at times we have some insight or some clarity into this separation, this division between inside and outside, or myself and other, as being illusory, generally we tend to view this world as just so, separate things, all bumping into one another. And I think that part of the reason that we do this is because we haven't developed the capacity or the space to hold these two truths, these two seemingly contradictory and yet simultaneously applicable truths. So we like to think, well, it's either everything is one, or everything isn't one, everything is separate. So when we come to practice, a lot of the times, we kind of are often frustrated by the isolation and by the cruelty or the suffering that we perceive going on in a world in which everybody is looking at the world as being a bunch of separate things. So in that world, we have the belief that I can benefit at the expense of you, or I can develop my own wealth and amass my own resources at your expense or at the expense of the environment. And when we perceive the world like this, if it's me and you, if it's me and everything outside of me, then a whole lot of harmful behavior can take place, because we can really believe that I can benefit and it doesn't, I can take and I can hurt, and it doesn't impact me in some way, as long as I keep all that stuff outside of me. And I think for a lot of us, we come to practice because we feel the limitation. We feel the lack of completion or fulfillment in this kind of a worldview. And so we hear about Buddhism or something like this. We hear of a spirituality. It doesn't even have to be Buddhism. It could be any spirituality. When we hear about the sort of unbounded, unconditional love of God, for example, we can jump to that as an alternative. We say, oh, vast emptiness, nothing holy. Oh, this is a really expansive teaching. Interdependent co-origination. Wow, like we all are fundamentally one, and these ideas of separation are completely illusions, and the idea of me and mine and subject and object are false. They're just false. They don't really have any reality or exist. We can come into practice and completely move the other way. But from the perspective of the Zen school, we're not actually making any kind of improvement. Fundamentally, we're still fixated with the idea that it's either this or it's that. And the metaphor that's often used is, if we look at the ocean and we're sort of close up to it, we can talk about the things that are going on there. We can say, well, there are waves coming up and there are waves going down, and there's vapors coming off and there's rain falling into it. And so there's a whole lot of stuff going on, and this is true. But then if we sort of take this great step back into a sort of space view maybe of the oceans, and we look, we can say that actually in the great ocean, there's not a whole lot going on. Like sure, there's these things that are going on, but the big picture is nothing is really rising and falling. Nothing is really increasing or decreasing in the vastness of the ocean. And this is also true. And so this is the basis of this teaching of two truths, is that we have to step outside of this either-or mentality, the subject-object mentality, the contradictory mentality, the antagonistic mentality, and step into a spaciousness which holds that both there is self and there is no self. Another way that this has been expressed, and another way that I express it, is that there is realization and manifestation. There is the activity of minus, dissolution, and the activity of arising, the plus activity. Huangbo, one of the, Rinzai's teacher, Linji's master, used this metaphor of a bird, and he said, the two wings of the bird are wisdom and compassion. And essentially, this characterization of these two activities is no different. There is the activity of wisdom, which is unconditioned or unconditional. It is the perfection of the big perspective, wisdom. And there is the side of compassion, which is the perfection of manifestation. Likewise, in the form that we use, there are different requirements. When we're sitting, engaged in our depth of meditation, we can have these profound realizations. Even if we're working on a koan, we can have this profound insight into the nature or into the core of the koan. But then when we go down into the interview room and our teacher says, so you've had this realization in your meditation, so how do you manifest that? How do you demonstrate that? And it can be really difficult to manifest that. Keegan even was talking about this last Tuesday, saying, I understand some things about Zen, but to even put them into words or talk about them is really a difficult thing. And this is very true. I think we've all experienced this to some degree or another. And that's just trying to manifest this teaching in the context of like a formal environment, let alone going into your own personal relationships and your workplace and trying to transition. How does this really deep realization, transcendent realization or wisdom, how can I have that rubber hit the road? And that's a challenge in practice. So what usually happens with an individual, and I think each of us has to constantly sort of assess this, is that we end up with a really strong wing and a really skinny wing. Like I call it the Arnold Schwarzenegger wing and the Pee Wee Herman wing. And it happens in individuals and it happens in organizations as well. And this is what I'm seeing right now in one organization that I'm working with, not ours, thankfully, but that there is this constant avoidance of dealing with our weak side. And we all have this, I think. It's difficult to confront what is difficult to confront. And so we're always going to try to wriggle around so that we can address it from the side that we're most comfortable with. And some of us, the most comfortable thing is to deal with it in a very divisive subject-object way. We want to make opposite poles. We want to create a competition, us, them, and we go about doing it that way. And when we do this, we are bypassing this fundamental unitive principle. We're bypassing this basic realization that we're not separate from the thing that we're opposed to. We're not apart from that, the perceived enemy. So you might call that bypassing the spiritual aspect or the spiritual component. The other direction that we can tend to go in is to not want to confront the difficulties in our own emotional baggage, the difficulties in the individuals who are coming into a situation. There can be conflict, and we want to avoid that conflict by sort of papering over it with platitudes like, all beings in this cosmos are fundamentally one, so there's no real ground for this conflict. And we can do this, but if we're doing this in an effort to really just avoid conflict as a whole, or to avoid addressing our own shortcomings or the shortcomings in relationship of the person that we're dealing with, this is actually it's a condition or a state that's been discussed for at least 30 years in Western psychology, and it's called spiritual bypassing. I don't know if you've all heard of that. And it's possible to do it as an individual in relationship, and it's totally possible to do this as an organization. And the way that this manifests is things like not getting your ethics statement up to speed, or not getting your governing structures, or not getting your boundaries between teachers and students up to snuff. Personally, it's about it can be, take for example, an individual who comes to do Zen practice as a whole, or Zen practice as a retreat, or even wanting to become a monastic. Arguably, I think that when I first came to Zen practice and decided that I wanted to become a monk, and I split up with Nikki, and I left, the crazy Victoria Zen Center with its retiree tea merchants and cookie peddlers, it was entirely spiritually bypassing. I couldn't work in any job because no job seemed to really grasp the fundamental concept of one true nature. Relationships made no sense to me because, there was no me and there was no you. So this idea of two individuals committing to one another for a lifetime just made no sense to me. And so when I went to the monastery, I think I was fully in the grips of a great effort of spiritual bypassing. The truth for me was that relationship was something that was very painful for me. Love was something that was very painful to me. And I think that came from my relationship with my mother, and having my mother having died when I was young, I didn't really want to deeply delve into both the vastness of love as well as the pain and the vulnerability that love offered. So what a great way to avoid all that is to move to a monastery and shave your head and become celibate. Wow! Not only will this make it really easy to avoid these things, but I'll actually be praised for doing it. It's highly virtuous. And so, for all of Sasaki Roshi's negative components, two of the most poignant instructions that I received, or poignant challenges, were after the first training period, when I was really stoked to be at the monastery, when the interview, which I had planned to go in and talk about, extending my stay and going on scholarship, and really he said, you don't need to stay here, and I want you to go to Victoria and make Victoria Zen Center. Which for me was like a sentence more than anything. It was, I had successfully managed to escape Victoria, and he sent me back there. And then about a year after that, when I went and asked, so coming back to Victoria and being put into this, pressed back into relationship or into contact with Nikki, a person who I loved very deeply, and still struggled to avoid, at least in a deep emotional sense, had this conflict between continuing to pursue Zen, wanting to continue to pursue my Zen practice, and this felt desire for commitment in relationship. And so when I went to the Roshi and said, I'd like to get ordained, I'd like to become a monk, I think still really looking for an escape, Sasaki Roshi said, oh yeah, okay, you can be ordained, but first you should get married. So always this mind that we must carry, that it's not either or, but both. What I think is also really important about this principle, this teaching, and particularly about this story, is that Sasaki Roshi, it seems, was really able to clearly see this problem in me as a student coming to him. And yet, he couldn't see that problem in himself. On the other side, the teaching of Rinzai-ji and the teaching of Sasaki Roshi is profoundly rooted in the absolute. Even the organization of Rinzai-ji has such a focus on Sasaki Roshi's teaching that I would say it's entirely lopsided towards the absolute. So that the result is that when something very relative, very much rooted in the world of subject and object, when abuses of power and sexual abuse and misconduct comes into play, is a very easy avoidance route established. If we get into that mindset and we say, there is no subject and there is no object, there is no me and there is no you. So for you to be offended by me fondling your breasts or encouraging you to have affairs with other people, you're just fixated with this idea of subject and object, and this is a delusion. So it isn't up to me, and it isn't up to it isn't just up to me, and it's not just up to Zenwest, but it's up to each and every one of us as we go forward in practice to clarify this. And it's up to each and every one of us to hold each other accountable to having two functional wings at all times. Now, each of us comes with a package. Our families, our upbringing, our life experiences, our interactions, our spiritual background, our religious background, all these things provide us with a package. And I don't know anybody that's come with two fully functioning, fit wings. Each of us comes lopsided one way or the other. And the experiences that we have are powerful. It's not as if things develop in a really even sort of balanced kind of way. It seems to go in fits and starts and chunks and like the thawing of an iceberg or something like that. Big chunks drop away and we veer one way and go, oh no, everything is one. And then, oh no, that person's really a jerk. And my job as a teacher, much like Sasaki's job as a teacher for me, was to reflect this, was to call it out, was to turn a student to face what is difficult to face. But we can't make the mistake that our teachers are perfect. We can't think that. It's tempting. Everything in some way is aimed to encourage us to trust the teacher, and is aimed to, we have a lot of cultural baggage and personal baggage, father, mother sort of psychology that makes us want to believe that that person, the head, the leader, is without flaws, without problems. But this teaching of Zen encourages us to remember that they're human. The Buddha was a human, and he manifested well, and he had great wisdom, great compassion, depth of understanding and realization, as well as the capacity to manifest it. But even if we look at the example of the Buddha, there were times where students bugged him about stuff, where students felt that he was making the wrong call. A notable example was in the question of women in the Sangha, which his cousin harassed him about on several occasions. I think we should have women in the Sangha. No, Ananda! But he persisted, and eventually the Buddha acquiesced. So, all of this is to say that there are three treasures: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And there are different ways of understanding how to respect each other. Respect, for a teacher to respect their students, as well as for the students to respect a teacher. And one way of understanding this is that there's deference. Whatever the teacher says, you just say, okay, you're the teacher. But for me, this is me, the greatest gift that I can have from my students is to be surpassed. If I have a student that can come around to me and say, hey, what's that? And I look at it, and in my own honesty, in my own capacity, I can recognize that something's being pointed out to me. This is not an act of disrespect. Now, you have to be skillful, of course. I have to be skillful as a teacher. And when the student begins to teach the teacher, they also have to be skillful. You can't just go, ha ha, teacher, you dummy, I got you. Finally! Ha! And the carpet comes out from your feet. But the recognition that it's not a contest, that we're all fellow travelers on the same way. I don't think that I'm perfect. I don't think that any teacher that I've had is perfect. And I only wish that when a student or many students had called on this teacher to recognize or to confront what is difficult to confront, that they were able to see this instead of as an insult or a matter of disrespect, as the highest respect, as the highest compliment to their ability to teach. That these teachers have provided an environment and a teaching and a community that has allowed their own students to see for themselves, that has allowed their own students to develop the light and wisdom to realize for themselves, but also for those students to manifest with strength and confidence and clarity and compassion. But that's my aspiration for a Sangha not just in Zen West, but also throughout North America, throughout the world. And it's a tall order. And what I'm seeing is over and over these themes repeated. And there's a reason, and we each have to really commit. When we chant our vows, when we chant the Torei Enji's Bodhisattva vow, to really commit to not getting stuck. The Rinzai uses this metaphor of a sticky lacquer tray. We're always looking for a place to set down, to rest. And it's always either going to be this way or that way. It's always, the subject-object perspective or the absolute perspective. We're always looking for a place where we can put it down and just say, this is the way that it is. Our practice, our commitment, our vow in Zen practice is to not give in to that temptation to have a lopsided worldview, to allow that to settle, but to continuously expand our view, expand our capacity as bodhisattvas to realize our lives and this world as both this and that simultaneously. They can seem like they're contradictions, but just like the metaphor of the ocean, or even just a simple metaphor of a coin. We talk about a coin, it is both heads and tails, form and emptiness, subject, object, and no subject and object. And it's not just that it's this and that, but it necessarily requires both to be anything. That's a big thing to sort of carry. That's a big thing to be aware of. So that's all I want to say today. So let's just continue to be aware of this fundamental teaching of the two truths, absolute and relative. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.